Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is October 7th. On this day in 2023, it was a quiet Saturday morning in southern Israel until the rockets began. In a matter of hours, thousands of them were fired from Gaza. Militants poured through breached fences, storming homes, bases, and roads. They moved on motorcycles, trucks, and even paragliders. By nightfall, it was one of the deadliest single days in Israel's history. More than 1,200 people were killed and over 240 were taken hostage into Gaza. The attack stunned Israel, shook the world, and reignited one of the most volatile conflicts on Earth. In this episode, we're going to trace what happened that day, how the assault unfolded, what intelligence systems missed, and how October 7th continues to shape lives and politics 2 years later. Let's get started. It began just after 6:30 a.m. It was Simchat Torah, one of Judaism's most joyful holidays. Most people were still asleep when the air raid sirens pierced the calm. At first, many thought that it was another round of rocket fire, which is something southern Israel had endured before. But within minutes, it became clear that this was something different. Militants from Hamas, the Islamist group that rules Gaza, had launched a coordinated assault by land, air, and sea. Rockets slammed into towns across the south. Fighters cut through the border fence with explosives, streaming through on motorcycles and pickup trucks. Others arrived by boat near Zikim Beach and by air using motorized paragliders. Their targets weren't just military bases. They hit kibbutzim, small farming communities like Be'eri and Kfar Eza. They struck Sderot, Ofakim, and the Raim Music Festival, where thousands of young people had gathered for an outdoor trance event. Video later verified by international media showed concertgoers sprinting through open fields as gunmen fired from trucks. More than 270 people were killed there alone. It was one of the single worst civilian massacres in Israel's history. Inside nearby towns, militants went door to door. Some residents hid in safe rooms for hours, texting family members until the messages stopped. Others were captured and dragged across the border. By the time Israeli forces regained control of many areas that evening, the full scale of the attack was still unclear, but the devastation was everywhere. The question that people began asking across Israel was simple. How did no one see this coming? Israel's security establishment is one of the most sophisticated in the world. They have surveillance drones, sensors, intelligence intercepts, and border cameras. Yet, Hamas had managed to plan and execute a large-scale invasion largely undetected. Analysts later pointed to what's often called the failure of imagination, a phrase that surfaces after every intelligence surprise. A February 2024 report by the West Point Combating Terrorism Center outlined how Israeli intelligence misread Hamas's intentions. They believe the group was focused on governance, not open war. And as a result, what should have been warnings were downplayed as routine. When border cameras started showing unusual activity that morning, some commanders assumed that it was a localized incident, maybe smugglers or protesters. By the time the reality sank in, entire communities had already fallen. In 2025, Israel's own internal inquiry acknowledged, quote, severe failures from underestimating Hamas's capabilities to slow mobilization of southern forces. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu later called it, quote, the gravest security failure in the country's history, end quote. As Israel counted its dead, the details that emerged were almost unbearable. Investigations by Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and multiple Israeli outlets documented what survivors described. Civilians shot at close range, homes burned with families inside, and people, including the children and the elderly, taken hostage. Some victims were killed in their beds. Others were abducted from their homes, from highways, and from festival grounds. By the following week, Israeli officials said that more than 240 people were missing or confirmed to have been taken. Hamas later revealed videos of some captives, which they used as a psychological weapon as much as proof of life. International investigators, including the UN's Commission of Inquiry, later described elements of the attack as, quote, widespread and systematic, end quote, possibly amounting to crimes against humanity. But the fog of war also created confusion. Some of the earliest and most graphic claims could not be independently verified. Journalists and human rights groups faced limited access and conflicting testimony. But Israel's response was immediate. Within hours, the government formally declared war on Hamas, the first such declaration in half a century. The Israeli Defense Forces began airstrikes on Gaza, followed by a large-scale ground operation. The campaign aimed to destroy Hamas's military wing, rescue hostages, and eliminate the group's leadership. But as the war unfolded, the humanitarian toll in Gaza mounted rapidly. Entire neighborhoods were flattened, and thousands of civilians were killed. Hospitals, schools, and UN shelters were all struck. By early 2025, the UN estimated that tens of thousands of Palestinians had died, and most of them were civilians. Globally, reactions split sharply. The United States and European allies reaffirmed Israel's right to self-defense, but urged restraint and protection of civilians. Arab and Muslim-majority countries condemned the killing of civilians in Gaza and called for an immediate ceasefire. The result was a wave of diplomatic grifts, protests, and shifting alliances across the Middle East and beyond. Legal debates erupted too. Could the October 7th attacks themselves constitute genocide or crimes against humanity? Some scholars said yes, citing the specific targeting of Jewish civilians. Others cautioned against using legal terms while everything was still under investigation. But behind the statistics are the people in both Palestine and Israel, those who survived and those who didn't. Entire kibbutzim lost dozens of residents. Families were split between funerals and hostage support groups. In Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, walls and plazas filled with photos of the missing. For months, Israel lived under the shadow of the hostages. Each exchange, which was often mediated through Egypt and Qatar, brought moments of relief and heartbreak, as some were freed and others were confirmed dead. Around the world, hate crimes spiked in both directions. Anti-Semitic incidents surged across Europe and the U.S., while anti-Muslim harassment reached record highs in places like the UK. In a single day, the violence of one place had ignited fear and division in many others. Now, 2 years later, accountability remains a central demand. Israel's military and government inquiries continue, as do investigations by the United Nations and the International Criminal Court into alleged crimes by both Hamas and Israeli forces. Each side rejects the other's jurisdiction. In a February 2025 statement, the UN Commission urged both to, quote, preserve evidence and cooperate with independent investigators, end quote. But whether that happens remains uncertain. In the meantime, the bombings continue. People are dying every single day. Thousands of civilians continue to be caught in the crossfire with no end in sight. October 7, 2023 was more than a date. It was a fracture that split lives, politics, and history. For Israelis, it's remembered as a morning of unimaginable loss. For Palestinians, it marked the start of a war that has no foreseeable end. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found today's story compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It'll help us grow. And be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe, and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day, True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!